So the main reason we're all here is to talk about the payroll protection program and some of the other COVID programs that are out there, and make sure that everyone's aware of what's going on and what they need to be prepared for. So to kind of talk a little bit about me, it kind of helps to get a little background knowledge. Some of you have already talked with me before, but to give everyone a little bit more background, I'm the baby of a family. I've got one older brother and one older sister. Look at me on the bottom left, super cute. Love that Disney shirt, by the way. It glowed in the dark. That was actually kind of one of my favorite shirts growing up. May be the baby, but I did end up outgrowing all my siblings and everyone else in my family, taller and bigger. So this is at my sister's wedding there. I was born and raised in Ely, Nevada. So to give you kind of a reference point, it's about 5 hours east of where we're at here. Great place to grow up, kind of like Dayton, Minden type area. Some good stuff to do, but always kind of nice to grow up out of there. And what people always asked me growing up was, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? And I always answered, I wanted to be in the medical field. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to help people and make a change in the world. So what I did is I went to St. George, Utah to go to college. They've got good medical schools over there. I did decide to be a chiropractor, but I realized most chiropractors are business owners. So I took an intro to accounting class just to kind of get a little bit of knowledge under my belt. But after 2 weeks of being in that class, I went ahead and changed my major. It was probably the only career change I've ever made. Really excited that I did that too, because it's led to some great opportunities, and I've got to meet some really amazing people through accounting and working with business owners. And I've never looked back from making this decision. It's been one of the greatest ones I've ever had. I recently moved to Dayton is where I'm living actually, but I work down here in Minden at Carson Valley Accounting. And Drew Aguilar, the owner there, gave me some good opportunities. Thankfully he hired me just before COVID hit, and he's done a lot to make sure that every employee there is taken care of and stays part of the team. So, Carson Valley Accounting, we always like to joke, we've got less than 500 years of accounting experience, if you could believe that. Sometimes it seems like more, though. What we've done through this COVID crisis and the opportunities that it's presented is we have been able to help probably fund over more than $1 million of PPP loans and other COVID relief, where we can help business owners that are local here. We've been working in the Valley for several decades. But just because we're local here and working in the Valley doesn't mean we don't have clients all over the world that we've been helping relate and educate through this system and this whole kind of crazy that it is. Legal notes, these kind of sucks, but we've got to keep those bloodsuckers at bay. So, this is just an educational presentation. This doesn't represent an accountant-client relationship. If you guys want to have more information, more detailed, more specific to you, I'd love to set up calls so we can kind of go through that. As a kind of a quick overview, what we're planning on talking about here today is going through some of the recent progress and recent things that have happened through those loans and through the systems, and then also talking about a lot of the biggest risks factors that are approaching business owners as they're trying to navigate through this, so that we can make sure that everyone is as prepared as possible to navigate through this and have the best outcome, because we can see a lot of pitfalls coming and a lot of things that we'll get more in depth into. So what we'll do here then, let's go ahead and kind of get through this. So there's a lot of information. The PPP fund ended on August 8th, so there's a lot of information about that. I've cherry-picked some of the information here just to give everyone a little bit of background and go through the numbers. So there was $650 billion that was put on the table for this, and only about $525 billion was used. It's about 80%. You can see here that, the highest count of loans and the highest dollar amount of loans went to California, being a large state, a lot of people, a lot of business owners. Definitely one of the reasons there. In Nevada, in comparison, we had about 45,000 loans for a total of about 4.2 billion. So nothing to balk at there, but definitely some good numbers. Hopefully we can help keep some businesses in Nevada open and running and going through all of this. So now that we've hit some of those numbers, I bet you everybody's just a little bit more tired, and maybe that coffee's worn off just a little bit. So we can go ahead and kind of make this a little bit more practical and not talk about the higher numbers, but actually talk about what business owners can actually do with this. So talking about forgiveness, that's the big piece of it right now. If you received a PPP loan, the Payroll Protection Program loan, this is probably the biggest thing on your mind right now, is worrying about and going through the forgiveness steps. And we're going to cover a lot of things. Here are some do's and don'ts, or some things to keep in mind. So first off, if you received a loan, there are stipulations that this needs to be used primarily for payroll. Unfortunately, if you had a drop in pay or a drop in hours or a drop in employees, that can reduce the forgiveness that you can achieve. There are a lot of safe harbors, a lot of ways around that, though. For example, for food industry, that if you were shut down due to governor mandate or things like that, there are some ways around reducing the forgiveness to make sure that you still can get full forgiveness. And that's kind of on a case-by-case basis where we can work with you and go through it all. There is a deadline to apply for forgiveness, and that is generally 10 months after you receive the funds. So if you receive it in May of this year, that means you've got March of next year to apply for forgiveness. That's also when the payments for the loan start. So essentially, before you start paying back this loan, forgiveness needs to be applied. And we'll talk a little bit more about the timing of applying for forgiveness, because there's some interesting aspects to that as well. When you apply for forgiveness, those current rules are what's going to be dictating your forgiveness. So sometimes we want to try to wait or see what's going to be most beneficial for everyone involved. If you are not able to get the full loan forgiven, then some of this is going to need to be repaid. And unfortunately, the interest on these loans starts the moment you receive the funds. However, if you get a loan and only some of it is forgiven, the interest is only accrued on the portion that's not forgiven, but it will go back to the date that you received the funds. So something to keep in mind there. Just yesterday I was talking to somebody, and due to a situation, she will have some loan that will not be forgiven, and she will have to pay interest that goes back to the date she got it. Some other highlights here is there have been 2 optional periods that you can use, the 8-week or the 24-week. 9 times out of the 10, the 24-week period is more beneficial because it's longer. You can spend more of the money where it should go so that you can get full forgiveness. Excuse me. Some other things to think about is that when you're the owner employee of the business, or if you're a self-employed individual, there are some different caps of about the amount of expenses you can use. So in general, employees are capped at the $15,000 for an 8-week period, or the $46,000 for a 24-week period. If you are an owner employee of like an S corporation and you're paying yourself a wage with holdings on that, or if you're a self-employed individual and you don't have a paycheck from the company, you're just taking the profit of the company, you're limited at the 15 or the 20,000, depending on which time period you use. So again, another reason why you'd want to use the 24-week period, because that's where you can use more of those funds. In general, though, if you use 60% of the funds on payroll-related expenses, you should receive full forgiveness. So if you got $100,000 of loans, as long as you're using 60 grand of that for payroll expenses, then you will more than likely be able to get full forgiveness. So now that we've covered at that, what's next? What's coming up, and what do we need to be thinking about going forward? Because all of this that we've talked about so far has just been some general information that has been pretty widely spread, and hopefully everyone was aware of it. So I didn't want to take too long touching on that. But this next part here is talking about what's coming up and what we need to think about moving forward. So as time has gone on, there has been new guidance and new laws that are coming out that will hopefully be beneficial. What we've seen is that as new laws and regulations are being passed, they are becoming more favorable for smaller businesses and smaller loans. In fact, just a few months ago, if you received a PPP loan that was less than $50,000, you can use the simplified forgiveness form, which is just a single page, as opposed to using the easy form, which is 3 pages, as opposed to the full form, which is 5 to 6, 7 pages. And of course, the more complex the form, the more documentation that has to go with that. So for the simplified form for forgiveness, it's a really straightforward form. There's not a whole lot of documentation that has to go to it, which means there's not a lot of time or effort for compliance on the business owner to get this. There are several pieces of legislation that are in the floor right now, coming from both sides of the aisle. But until those really get passed, there's not a whole lot except speculation on that, on what they'll be able to do. There are a few that are possibly talking about having a second wave of PPP funds given out, since we only used 80% on the first round. There's some that's already allocated that might be able to go towards the second round. Again, until that legislation passes, there's kind of just cross your fingers and hope that things will get pushed through. But relying on the legislation to get things passed, you might be waiting a while. This is really a unique situation. I mean, 2020 is just a year that we'll never forget, and is just having new things all the time, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It makes it challenging to get through things, but as business owners, as entrepreneurs, that's where we thrive. That's where we want to be, as in the changing world, because that's where we can apply the entrepreneurial spirit and take advantage of a lot of these opportunities. I don't like to think of them as negative things. I like to try to spin it to where we can do things differently, and that is probably going to be better. A lot of companies are coming out with new things or new products, new systems that allow them to get even farther than they were before. But when you're talking about compliance and working with the government, it makes it a little bit more challenging to stay in the know and know what's going on. A lot of business owners didn't get into business to work in compliance. They got into business to do what they love, or the freedom that comes with being an entrepreneur. And that's where we kind of step in with a lot of our clients, is being able to provide a lot of that compliance education, knowledge, and expertise. And that's what I want to talk about next, is some of the things that we've learned and some of the things we're advising some of our current clients on, and talk about some of the experience we've had with the forgiveness side of this. So the risk area here is that each lender or each bank kind of does it in their own way. I mean, it's fairly standardized, but the layout and the way that things are approached will be different between all the different banks. If you're working with somebody local, you might have a better experience because you can go in or call in, I suppose, now with the way things are, but actually talk with somebody. And if you're working with Chase, you might be sitting on phone, waiting to talk to a support representative who may not be able to help a whole lot. So each lender and each bank has a slightly different way that they're approaching this in the way the form is going to be laid out. All of the information about the form and the information about how the forgiveness works, that is standard. But just how it needs to be entered onto their screens is a little bit different. And for the most case, it's kind of, you have to muck through it on your own. They don't have a whole lot of support besides a text bubble that tells you what things are. There is the paper application that you can fill out, the PDF version of the forms you can fill out, but very few, if any, banks or lenders are actually accepting those. They want you to use their portal. And the lenders and banks, they're getting information directly from the SBA as it's being created. But the way that this was set up is the Congress told the SBA to manage this, but they didn't necessarily tell them how or get into specifics. So the SBA has kind of been coming up with this on the fly and then providing information to everyone else on the fly as it comes up. So it almost feels like the blind is leading the blind here, and we're all trying to figure it out the best we can. The next area that, especially in the accounting world, has provided the most frustration is the taxation of this. The CARES Act deemed that the loan is not taxable, which has been confirmed by the IRS. The proceeds of the loans, the money you receive, is not taxable income. Also, when you get loan forgiveness, you will not receive a 1099-C as in Charlie, and that is for debt cancellation. So normally, if you have your debt canceled, a loan canceled, that will be taxable income to you, the individual or the business. However, with the PPP loan, that is not the case. The loan proceeds and the forgiveness of the loan proceeds is not taxable. However, and this is where it really gets frustrating for our side, the IRS has essentially countered that by saying, sure, the loan proceeds are not taxable, but they won't let you double dip on the expenses. So if you use, in this case, let's say $60,000 of payroll expenses to get $100,000 of PPP loan forgiveness, that same $60,000 of expenses, the IRS has said cannot be used for your income tax deduction. So when you go to file your taxes in this case, you would put, okay, I had $100,000 of payroll expenses, but because you used $60,000 for PPP, your payroll expense deduction is only going to be $40,000. What that does, though, is if you have less expenses, your taxable profit will go up, which means that you are going to be paying more tax because the expenses will not be used for your income tax. A lot of people are against this. The IRS, of course, trying to make money for the government is pushing hard to keep it this way, but there's a lot of things in motion that may get this to change. As of right now, if in the year of forgiveness, the expenses will not be counted. So if you've already received forgiveness for your PPP loan, the expenses used for that should not go on your tax return per the IRS notice. And we're strategizing with a lot of our clients in ways to try and make that as beneficial and as easy as possible. So there are some very specific situations that have different rules to it. So if you are a state or federal government contractor, there's a lot of different things that go into that because you can't receive funds from the government and have it forgiven and receive income from the government. So there's a lot of interesting things there. If you deal with the mortgage industry, or if you're subleasing, or if you're paying mortgage on a personal home and using that for a business office, and you use some of those expenses for forgiveness, you can run into some trouble. So there are some specific things for that as well. Additionally, if you own multiple businesses as the business owner and multiple businesses receive the PPP funds, you as the business owner can only receive or only get your deduction part for the forgiveness once. So you can't get it for every business you have. You only get that $20,000 in total. And that's something a lot of people have, is they have multiple businesses, and if more of them got PPP, then we have to kind of structure that and make sure we calculate that correctly for them. Again, if you had drop in pay rates or hours or employees or total head count, there's some specific rules that apply for that. Again, we can kind of work around that a little bit. This is not an exhaustive list, though. Everyone's a little bit different, and the rules are kind of tweaky for a couple different situations. So if you feel like you're in a situation where it's not kind of the standard vanilla type situation for this, please give us a call. We want to try to work through it with everybody and make sure everyone gets the best outcome as possible. So now you're probably thinking, help, what do I do next? Now that we've talked about what the PPP is and some of the forgiveness aspects and some of the specific rules, what are the next steps? What should everybody be doing as soon as they log off of this and finish up their coffee? And what's the next thing as soon as they're done with that? So what we're generally telling everybody to do is, once you've hit a point to start looking at it, we need to start reviewing payroll expenses. Excuse me. Because those payroll expenses are going to be the primary driver of your forgiveness. And how the primary part of there are other expenses, but in general, when I'm approaching this for someone and going through their PPP, I'm primarily looking at their payroll costs. So those payroll costs, we want to have 60% of the loan essentially be those payroll costs. If it's less than that, you will not get full forgiveness. Even if it's 59.99%, there's probably going to be a little bit of forgiveness that's not there, that you will have a loan. Things that go into payroll costs are the actual gross wages paid to an employee, which is capped at the $46,000. And essentially, if your employee makes more than $100,000 a year, that's going to be cut down and capped at that $100,000 a year level. If you're an owner employee or self-employed, again, that's capped at either 15 or 20,000, depending on which time period you're using. So we want to start looking at this and going through, okay, what are my numbers? There's healthcare benefits that's being paid by the employer. There's state taxes, those types of numbers we want to try to look at and see what we're working with. Once we kind of understand where we're at there, that's going to help determine are we ready to file? Do we need to keep spending more? Do we need to give out a bonus to somebody or up it somehow to make it to where we're getting full forgiveness? So once you know what those expenses are and you've got a tabulation of kind of where you're at, the next question is, are to file or not to file? That is the question. Good old Shakespeare. Probably paraphrasing that just a little bit there. On one hand, as soon as you hit the limit, as soon as you've got full forgiveness, it's a good idea to file, because then you can get that forgiveness. However, with the trend of the new legislation and the new rules, it has been getting better. It has been getting more beneficial for an owner. So one thing is that you can wait. You have until that 10 months after you receive the funds to apply for forgiveness. That's a good window of time to kind of work through things, see what's going to be the best, hopefully get some Congress actions here that's going to increase it, and hopefully even get some forgiveness automatically for some loans that are under some certain dollar values. And then you've also got to weigh the side of the taxation of it. Right now, if you file for forgiveness and you receive the forgiveness in 2020, on your 2020 tax return, those expenses cannot be listed. I've only had one situation where I'm actually recommending to the person to file right away. She's selling her business, and there's some, at the end of the year, she's transitioning to a new owner and she doesn't want to have anything hanging over. So she's going to go ahead and pay the extra tax bill just to go ahead and take it done. If Congress, the IRS changes that ruling to where you can deduct those expenses, it's possible that you could go back and amend the tax year, claim those expenses, and potentially get a refund back of taxes you've paid. So just as of right now, that's what the rules are. But again, we're really hoping that they change it to be in the way that the CARES Act was written and done. The last thing that we telling everybody, document everything. They're taking this pretty serious, especially the value of the loan. If you've got a pretty large loan, 6 figures or more, you really need to be on top of it. Documentation that they're going to look for is essentially proving that those expenses you're claiming on forgiveness actually happened. If you're primarily dealing with with payroll, they're going to be looking at payroll summary reports from your payroll system. They want to see the 941, which is your quarterly federal filings with the government to show that you've had payroll. They're going to want to try to evidence back everything up. Think about like getting a loan for a house. You're going to have to document just about everything because you're working with lenders, you're working with underwriters, you're working with the federal government. They're going to want to see as much documentation as possible. And these steps are really things that we work with our clients with all the time, where we're going through their payroll system and processing through what are the numbers, what's the final dollar value, and then we help advise them, should we be filing now, should we be filing later, where are you at, how can you file, should be using this form versus that form, and helping them pull together all the documentation that they could probably ever need to support these expenses. And that's really the primary part here. So I wanted to leave a lot of open room for questions and comments and have a discussion period where we can work together and we can talk together to go through some of this information and answer any questions that maybe people have heard about or read about, and we'll see what we can do. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen here, and that way you guys can see my beautiful face and bow tie, and we can kind of talk through some things. So if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and unmute your mic, or you can type into the chat bar any questions you may have, and we'll try to address those today. Let's see, does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to chat through? It looks like everybody's microphones are muted, so if you are trying to say something, we may not be able to hear if your microphone is muted. And I'd also like to open up questions for other topics as well. If anybody has anything COVID related or accounting related that they're working through that they'd like to talk about, we can go ahead and kind of chat through that as well. I do also want to thank the Chamber for putting on this presentation so that we can try to get some of this knowledge out to the public and provide value to business owners that we can. So again, thank you, Alicia. I think she was the primary person in getting all this set up. So thank you for working with me on this so we can get this out there. Let's see, I'm not seeing any chat questions, or if anybody has any questions.
Hi, this is Alicia. I want to thank you, Chris, for doing that. And You guys, if you have questions, and like he says,
Say that one more time there, Alicia.
If you guys have accounting questions, we'll make sure you get his information at the end. But please ask questions now for this or any accounting questions for him. Thanks.
All right, so we got Nicole there. She said in the chat, thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. And so we can kind of work through this. Gotcha. Well, I think it doesn't look like anyone's got any questions. So that's awesome. Has anybody already applied for forgiveness? And maybe they can talk to the group about how that experience went for them, so we can kind of rely on each other's experience and gain knowledge from that. Okay, so it looks there that Jill over at the Chop Shop, looks like you guys did apply for forgiveness and that it was with Bank of America. Okay. Have you heard anything back from Bank of America? With the forgiveness, the banks have, I believe it's 30 days to process the information, and then they send it to the SBA, who then have 60 days to process the information. So at a maximum, this is a 3-month turnaround after you apply. So it looks like she was able to use the EZ form with it all, so that's awesome. Okay. So it doesn't look like Jill over at the Chop Shop has actually heard anything back from him yet, but that's awesome. Tony, it looks like she's saying there that you guys applied with Plumas and that they've been great. That's awesome. I'm glad they're doing well. Okay, and it looks like someone else there is working with Greater Nevada Credit Union. That's awesome. I like credit unions. I think they do a little bit better job working with their members on stuff. So, okay, but they're using Fountainhead. That's right, though. They're not actually processing the loan themselves, which is something that a lot of smaller banks are having trouble with. The volume of all of this information and trying to change their systems and put systems in place has been pretty difficult for them. So, I gave them a hard time because they all do things a little bit different, but it's not like they had an easy task to begin with. So perfect. Let's see, is there anyone who has not applied for the forgiveness aspect of this yet? Is there anyone who's waiting or hasn't done it just because they're unsure or they don't think they've hit the right numbers? Okay, Nicolette, looks like you haven't. I know you, Nicolette, you and I talked, I think at the beginning of this, back in beginning of the year, to kind of talk through some of the initial information. A lot of what we talked about back then is old hat and outmoded actually now, to where some of that stuff doesn't even apply because they've rewritten the rules 5 or 6 times since then. But we can definitely help you with that, Nicolette, if you want more assistance going through that. And making sure you've got everything tucked away and all the documentation set together. Perfect. How about EIDL, the Economic Impact Disaster Loan? Has anyone received that from the SBA on top of the PPP fund? Okay, so it looks like a few people have. So the difference between the economic, yeah, perfect. Nicolette, I look forward to talking with you then. So the EIDL, the Economic Impact Disaster Loan, is a loan that's been around for a very long time. And every time there's a big disaster, usually on a national scale, they release more funds for this, to where people can apply through the SBA. I believe the loan rate was 3.75%. I think they are still open to accepting applications for this. That is an actual loan, though. There is no forgiveness tied directly to the EIDL. Because that is treated like a loan. There was in the very beginning an advance of the EIDL, and that was forgivable. And if you received an EIDL advance from the SBA, that will decrease your PPP forgiveness. So if you got an EIDL advance of 10 grand, that 10 grand is forgiven. When you go to apply for a PPP forgiveness, your forgiveness will be limited to the amount over 10 grand. So if you got an EIDL advance, you will have a PPP loan to pay back. Unfortunately, that is the case. And that's been a frustrating point because that wasn't always explained. And I actually have had some people say, well, the SBA told me that it is forgivable as long as you use it for not the EIDL advance for non-payroll expenses. If that's the case, great. Everything I've seen and read is that what you use the loans for doesn't affect that, the PPP forgiveness. Everything that we've seen is if you receive a loan advance of the EIDL, it will offset your PPP forgiveness. Okay. And it looks like there, Cecilia, you're waiting for the fourth quarter to end so you can have the 941. That's awesome. Yeah, the more documentation that you can put together that you paid those expenses is just going to help make sure that this can be processed without any confusion and having time period hold up with banks just waiting for one more document and stuff like that. Excuse me. Gotcha. So where is everybody on kind of finishing out the year? Does anyone have any questions about how 2020 is going to be going for anything related to kind of COVID related items, even personally, maybe not just business, the stimulus package, things of that nature? Does anyone have any questions about those type of topics? Excuse me. Because that's something we've had a lot of questions on, more on an individual level, is receiving the stimulus check, that $12,000 per adult individual. The way that was structured, just to give some background knowledge, is that it is a 2020 tax credit, but it's being pre-funded. So when everyone goes to file their 2020 tax return, if you did not receive the check or direct deposit this year, you will receive the credit on your 2020 tax return when you file next spring. If you already received it, then on your 2020 taxes next spring, you will need to indicate that you received that fund so that you don't get it twice. The government's not really too ecstatic about paying out money twice. Well, they're not too ecstatic about paying out money once if they can help it. Perfect. Let's see here. Does anyone have any other questions about any other topics that may have been covered here, or that has been lingering over them for the past couple months and they want to get it answered while we've got some time here? And I know we set aside the time to kind of have this be an hour-long presentation, and we got through it a little bit quicker than I expected, and I was thinking we'd get some more questions here, but it looks like everybody's doing well and able to get things taken care of, which is fantastic. We want to make sure that everyone is in the best situation possible with this. Again, I do want to say thanks to the Chamber for putting this on so we can get this information out there, and Alicia, who's been working through it a lot, and the rest of the team there as well. Perfect. Well, again, I appreciate everyone's time on hopping on here. And Alicia, I guess I will turn the time over to you to see if there's anything else you wanted to talk about there. I don't know if there was something specific you wanted to hit.
This is Alicia. No, if you guys have additional questions after you get back to your offices, or if you're in your offices and you think of them later, let me know. And we will get Chris your guys' information, and I will get you guys his, so you guys can communicate as questions come up. But thank you guys all for participating. And if you have other topics you would like to discuss, let me know.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was great having everybody on here. If you have any questions, just let us know, let Alicia know, and we'll address them as we can. But thanks, everyone, for your time, and best of luck to everyone for finishing out 2020. We're almost there, almost there. All right, everyone, have a great day.